Welcome a new chapter. We learn, we grow. Slow it down, you're right on time. This is your space to realign.
Welcome home, y'all, to another episode of the Just Pivot Pod. I'm your host, Lindsay, a licensed trauma therapist, an avid adventure seeker, and a former busybody turned soft life girly, living her best life on soft mode through wellness, travel, lifestyle, and faith. Today's episode, we're talking about how to know when it's time to quit your job. You see, this is a big question that many people have asked me. They've said, Lindsay, when did you know it was time to walk away? And so here's the short answer of it. It's a very short answer. Are you ready for it? If you know, you know. If you know, you know. That's the shortest answer that I can give you. And so I just want to let you all know this. This was not the first job that I walked away from, but this job was a little different because, if you think about it, if you know me, it's been one of the longest jobs that I've had in my young adult life, maybe just in life, period. This is the longest job that I have had. And so if you're new here, I want you to go ahead, like and subscribe to the channel. But more importantly, stick around as I share 5 questions that I asked myself before I quit my job. And so story time. Let's get into a little story time because I feel as though I have to go into a story time before I share my thought process and how I arrived at quitting my job. And so here's the short story. I love short stories. I was in ministry for about a decade. And when I walked into ministry, I was full of excitement, full of energy, like anyone would be when they're entering into what they believe is their calling. And I was genuinely ready to implement everything that I had learned from the seminary into practice. And so I thought to myself, how often, many of us have thought, how often do we get to say we're doing what we feel called to do and getting paid for it? I felt that many times as I navigated through ministry. And so in this past season of my life, I reflect and I've said, man, that has been you and that is you even presently in your life. And so here's the thing that they don't tell you when you're answering your calling. You can still burn out doing what you love. I covered that in a segment before this. And this just really helps to cement calling doesn't exempt us from exhaustion. Passion doesn't replace rest. And so oftentimes I have to remind myself, yes, you are called to this. Yes, you love what you do, but burnout is still a real thing. And that's why self-care is so important. It's not selfish, but it's actually a way of self-compassion and self-love. And so another thing that I've learned and that I wrestle with when answering the calling is aligning with purpose doesn't protect you from pain. And so this is very heavy. I've spoken about this many times through ministry. But what I'll say is this. You can be exactly where God sent you and still feel lonely. You can be exactly where God sent you and still feel unseen. You can be exactly where God sent you and feel misunderstood. All of these realities can be true and it can be real when we're looking to God to say, man, I'm on this purpose. I feel aligned. But these are just the realities of life: pain, suffering, loneliness, feeling unseen, feeling misunderstood. And so, here's where I will settle at. I'll say this: you might outgrow the spaces that once felt familiar and cozy and comfortable. That is exactly what I've resonated with as I've wrestled with, should I stay or should I go? At first, I think about my ministry over the past, decade. It's felt many times like a comfortable, warm space like home. I've seen many times when my gifts have been affirmed and confirmed, through just what God has been doing. I've experienced the embrace, from many of my peers and many of the people that I've served. I can also say the spaces that I've inhabited have felt safe at times. It's felt sacred and it's felt supportive. And so a knee-jerk reaction is, of course we get attached. Of course, it's not just a place. But I've gotten attached to the version of me, the version of Lindsay that fits in that place. And so I think back over the past decade, and there are versions of me that I was content with, that, I felt cozy with, that I was very comfortable with. But what I've been realizing through so many different, moments of reflection is that growth has a way of disrupting comfort. I've known this in so many different seasons of my life, but it's one thing to know it, but to actually live it and to walk in it. And so what once felt like alignment, it starts to feel like restriction. Like I thought I was aligned to this. But then as years may go on, or maybe seasons continue to evolve, you just feel like restriction. Or the work that once energized, I said it earlier, I was energized. I would wake up in the morning, be heavy in God's presence, and then go off to the office and do my work. And it just felt as though, like, man, did I even have a day? Because it just went through like it was nothing. Like, just so excited to cast vision, so excited to maybe do a visitation, so excited to do different parts of ministry, until there are seasons where, like, man, I feel so depleted. I feel so exhausted. And that's hard to sit with. That's hard to examine, to reflect, and to go through, just that Rolodex of all of those emotions. And so here's one thing that I know for certain and I know for true. And this is in the work that I do in so many different spaces. No one prepares us for this. I wasn't prepared for entering into this space. I understood it, but I wasn't prepared for it. And I want to drop this bombshell on you. No one prepares us for the grief of growing. I know. That's heavy, the grief of growing. And so what is the grief of growing? For me, and how I continue to work through it, is what once felt like alignment. Again, I'll say it again, like it just starts to feel like restriction. The grief of the version of me, the one who was content, the one who was attached to the work that I've done. Maybe it was deeply rooted in how I saw myself through my identity, or maybe it's the place. It just began to, like, the scales begin to fall, the curtain dropped, and boom, you're entered into act two. And so things just began to fade. What I can say also is I was grieving the comfort of what was just very familiar with routines, very predictable, whether it's environments, whether it's with people, where it just flowed. Like, I flowed in my job. I showed up, I worked hard, and I just, like, that's how I lived my life. I just showed up, worked hard, stayed out the way, kept my head down. And all of that brings me comfort because I saw it through what I was able to do and accomplish. Another grief that is very present within me is, like, um the reality, and I'll say this very gently, when we outgrow a space, the reality is we lose that cushion. And the reality is grief, and growth. If we're talking about grief and growth, it almost always brings discomfort. Um, and it's hard to even sit with the realization of I had become complicit in my own stagnation. I told you this was going to be a real heart to heart today. Yeah, I've become complicit in my own stagnation or my own cycle. And grieving for me was losing a part of myself, even when I know who I am and what I do. Like, I know who I am. Like, I know who God has called me to be. And it's also unlearning, maybe some things that I've allowed to maybe be louder than my call or louder than my reason. Um, that allowed me to ignore the very things that God is trying to push me into. So the call, like, I'll just say it this way, the call is still calling. The call is calling me not to stay complicit with the stagnation. The call is calling me to walk through the grief of growing, not to stay small, not to shrink, not to settle, not to dim my light, but it's calling me more than ever before to be stretched. And I believe that's a part of life. I believe that um, if we are desiring to grow in any way, shape, or form, we have to get comfortable with the uncomfortable. We have to be living in this knowing that I will be tested, I will be tried, I will be stretched. And it's designed for me to become the version that God has called me to be. And so that's when I knew it was time to start asking some soft questions. Before I used to ask hard questions, questions that would put me in a space of fear, questions that would put me in a space of shame, questions that would put me in a space of doubt, avoidance, questions that would put me in a space where I would shrink and settle and begin to dim, maybe not leaning into the stretch, but leaning in to the stay. Let me stay where I'm at. And so I began to shift and I would say pivot in asking softer questions, not out of bitterness, but out of honesty, like a heart to heart, so to speak. And that's what I want to talk through today with you all. It's more so like the 5 questions I asked myself before I walked away from the very space that once felt like everything I prayed for. That was the hardest thing. This was everything I prayed for, God. When I answered the call for ministry, there's some specific things that I prayed for. But in this season, God, you were calling me to a shift, to a pivot. And so one of the first questions, and there are 5 questions, by the way, that I began to ask myself these soft questions was, are you growing or just grinding? And so if you know me, you know that like I've seen hard work modeled through family, my mom and my dad, my brothers, my sister, my family, just period, through friends, through culture, right? We live the grind and all of that. And so at first glance, um, it can all look the same. You know, it can look like, just grinding out of hustle, right? Having, the new thing these days is what people say is what the rent is due. So, that mentality has always been ingrained within me. You don't work, you don't eat. The Bible says, consider the ant, when you think about hard work. And so, that could look like working long hours, being very disciplined in what we do, but underneath the surface, I have to ask myself, is that what nourishes me? Is the grind nourishing me or is it growing me? Um, is the grind draining me or is it growing me? And so what I'm living with in this truth is, and I've known this for so long, but when we're living it actively, growth challenges us because it expands us. It's expanding constantly. How am I viewing God? Like, it's expanding me of like the same God that I started with in ministry almost a decade ago. God has evolved. Like, my understanding and concept of God has evolved since then. How is this, season of my life or that job, how is it expanding my soul and spirit, my wellness and how I love myself as I love others? Again, I said it in the last segment. I love the passage in the Bible when the rich young ruler comes and he talks to Jesus, and he's asking him just this question, basically like, what must I do, like, to inherit eternal life? And that's one of the biggest questions I sometimes like pause with. And, he just goes back to, you got to love the Lord your God with all your soul, with all your spirit, with all your might, but also love your neighbor as you love yourself. And so I'm very big on self-care, like, because how am I expected to serve others from a cup that's overflowing if my cup is empty, right? And so all of that growth, it connects to one another. And so growth to me is creating from alignment, not from a space of angst, like I have this deadline to meet versus I'm aligned in my schedule and flowing in my schedule where I'm not flowing from scarcity, but I'm flowing from I feel enough right now. Um, it means honoring my limits. When we honor our limits as much as we honor our goals, I feel as though I can reach my goals because I know what's the driving force behind that goal. What am I having to take a step back with and analyzing to say, hey, like, I'm not at my capacity right now. And so if I'm not at my capacity, imagine the people that I'm serving, what they're the kind of Lindsay they're gonna get when I haven't honored the limits of rest, right? I haven't honored the limits of taking a step back just to breathe. I think what hit me at one point, I was talking and I was trying to take a vacation. And I take my vacations, but again, I'll run myself to a pulp and then take the vacation. And I'll take them in between, but sometimes I take work along with me and it's not restful. When I learned the years prior that I had so much vacation time that I left on the table. And things begin to start clicking like, oh, okay. So in this season, in this space of your life, when you should have rested and known your limit, that your plate is way too full, you're beyond, not at the capacity, you're beyond your capacity, right? You're just going, girl. Take a step back, like pause. And so knowing our limits and honoring them as much as we honor that drive to accomplish what we're setting out to is so important. That's where growth happens. But then I also recognize that, it was tension between the grind because the grind, we don't realize it, but it compresses who we are to perform. It demands us that we're more performance driven. We're more working from a space of survival or maybe a place of who do I need to please in order to show my value and to show my worth. And so producing out of pressure, not purpose. That's grind mentality. Hustling to prove our worth. That's grind mentality. Sacrificing, I mentioned this earlier. I've sacrificed vacation and other things like rest, joy, or even health just to survive. And so, what I've been learning and what I had to hear in that moment as I was considering, like, okay, what's this next season of life looking like? Grinding is what we do when we're afraid of losing momentum. And so is there a fear that I'm allowing to be louder than, what I know is true inside internally? But then it was also like sitting with knowing that growing is what I trust in, right? Like who I trust in. Like I'm gonna just sit that there. Like I'm trusting that God, like through this transition, you're gonna make a way out of no way. God trusting through this transition that all things will make sense in time. And so that was one of the first questions I asked myself. Am I growing or am I grinding? Like, and just allowing growth to just sing louder or speak louder than the grind. Another question that I asked myself was, am I showing up as my authentic self here? or just a version that fits in? And I think this was the question that I knew that had to be answered at some point, but I didn't. I was like avoiding and answering it and even sitting with it because I believe that this question it hits it hits at the heart of your authenticity, right? It hits at the heart of our values. It hits at the heart of who we are internally, who we are called to be, and also belonging. I'm not gonna hold you like, sitting with that question in spaces where conformity can quietly become the cost of staying. And so without realizing, we've learned to edit ourselves, not copy paste. That's another conversation for another day, but we begin to edit like, let me just say the right things to avoid the conflict. Let me just stay in line with the culture or the status quo so that I won't get the repercussions of speaking up and advocating. Let me avoid making waves. So someone out there is like, let me just avoid, making waves. If I ask this question, I know what kind of waves will come back, but let me avoid it. Let me just play the role. And so over time, that edited version of us becomes our default. We stop sharing ideas. We withhold the truth. We don't become truth tellers. We become basically just some people who just are complicit with the wrongs that are happening. We see it. It gives us this boil in our blood and we're like, we know that's wrong, but our silence, we think about the long game. Like I've been told, like, we're running a marathon, not a sprint. So you just gotta hold up, just ease it on up, right? We mask our frustration with a polished smile. And so we learn to adapt so well that I forgot what it felt like to just be without code switching, without trying to filter through or perform. And I believe that there's time and place. I'm not here to say, oh, just go in there, be your authentic self at the job and give them a piece of your mind and start cussing everybody out. You didn't hear that from me. I didn't say that. But if you feel as though that is your truth and that's what is called for you to be more aligned with where you need to be, go right ahead. Like, have at it, do your thing, do your big one, right? And so what I'll say is this, like the job, it looks good on paper, right? But think about like what's not on paper. Still don't feel seen, still don't feel free, still code switching, feel like a character we've been playing for so long. And we're not even sure, like, who we are, the person that we feared we become, right? And so that was one of the things that I had to sit with is like, are you showing up authentically, Lindsay? Or are you just playing the part? And I'm telling you, like, if I had to sit with it, I encourage you sit with it if you're wrestling with this reality of how do I know it's time to quit my job? Number 3, another one. All of these I had to wrestle with, but this next one is very, very near and dear to my heart because I've been there many times, right? And I've talked to people who are there. They've been there. And people will ask, like, have you explored every, not just an option before walking away, but every healthy option? I'll stress the healthy option. Depending on which field you're in, it may be easy, to just walk away and say, you know what, I can't even deal with this. Like, let me just start looking on Indeed. Let me look on ZipRecruiter. Let me do it. I can't take it any longer. Again, like sometimes it just calls for that. Like you've exhausted the option, right? Of maybe talking directly with the situation and things aren't changing. And so, of course, like by all means, go. Like I don't believe staying in toxicity, right? Um and so questions that are like sub questions to that is, instead of like, before you thought to leave, have you had the hard conversations you've been avoiding? And so I think about it this way. You know that at work, you're working, and this is just like a situation that I'm just getting off the top of my head. You're working with a certain like situation, and maybe you have conflict with a coworker or colleague. The question is like, before you walk away, maybe take a step back and say, is it worth having a conversation to see how I can continue to be on a team and to work through XYZ? Again, like, sometimes there's a conversation because maybe it's culture. Like, I come from one culture, you come from another culture. Maybe we're just missing cues. Maybe we're just not seeing it, like the big picture. Like, and so some of these things can really be solved through, let's just have a conversation. Like, let's get out the email, because people get in the email, and emails, are very, like, misunderstood sometimes. You may misunderstand the tone, the tag. We may put ourselves in the email, and that's not even what the person was trying to convey. And so communication is very key to navigating, like, problem solving or understanding, so that the mission can be lived out, right? And so having hard conversations is step one. Like, is this an environment where I can have hard conversations? And it's not like retaliatory. Hope I said that right, right? You're not going to experience retaliation. And so those are real things in jobs. Like, retaliation is super duper real. Um, Another question is, have you clearly expressed your needs and boundaries? And so again, like, these are some needs that I have. These are some of my boundaries. Some jobs, they can definitely bend. Like, I at my previous job, I've been gracious where, I was able to work in my city, still commute to important meetings, um and, like, the flexibility there, like. And so there were some things that I expressed directly, and some things that I didn't even have to express because it was understood, and they just made allowances for it, and I was so grateful for it, right? But in some cases, that's not the case. Like, you can't even clearly communicate, like, a boundary of, don't call me after hours. Like, what you mean? This is a part of the job, right? Or XYZ, whatever the case may be. And so checking that off is very important. Like, have I asked for support instead of silently suffering? And so again, it goes back to the first sub question that I asked. Have you had the hard conversations you've been avoiding? And so some conversations, it can be very nuanced, right? Like, you can kind of think the long game of, okay, so is it worth it? But some may lean into, well, is it going to even solve the problem, right? I've been asking for this kind of support. I've been ignored, and it's more so self-preservation. I've worked through it in the past. Let me just, move through it so I can get to the next thing that is much priority. Does that solve the problem? May not, but I get it. I understand it, right? And so sometimes it's just an ask. Maybe there's an oversight. I like to lean into not assuming, but definitely asking. But again, things are different wherever you work. And so what I can say is this: asking for support can definitely help to alleviate having to suffer through a big project on your own. Another one, I would say, another question is, have you checked if your expectations are still aligned with the season of your life? And so I had to, like, as I'm reflecting and praying, um, God, you're leading me into the season. And I just feel as though that, like, the only expectation I have for myself is doing my best. Like, I expect excellence out of myself because that's what I like have been ingrained, and that's a part of who I am. And so I had to check in with myself. Like, sometimes like my excellence may look different in this season because am I surrounded with, different things or things like that. And so I had to check in with myself. Um, but then lastly, as I wrap this one up, have you taken space to rest? Have you taken time to reset or reassess your role? And so sometimes our decision making is we are making decisions unrested, unreset, haven't taken the vacation, um, haven't reassessed our role. What is our job description? Am I doing above and beyond? And I'll go back to the next one. Sometimes we put more expectation on our job. We put more effort into that and what we think they should be doing, where the job is just the job. Like, maybe we're going above and beyond. We're saving versus serving, right? And I mentioned that in the last episode, but it goes back to when making this decision, am I rested? Am I reset? Have I reassessed? And explored these healthy options and walking away, because sometimes the issue isn't the assignment, it's maybe the approach and how I'm navigating the problem solving. And sometimes it's not time to leave for that person out there. Maybe it's time to shift something within the space. So maybe there's something that I'm, again, bringing into this space that I've expected more than what they said that they can do. They didn't say they can do that, but I created something in my mind, or someone else may have created something in their mind and said, "Hey, like I thought," and it's like, "Well, did you ask?" Um, and so maybe it's shifting perspective, shifting the way how I show up, shifting in different ways in my personal life. But I don't want us to gaslight ourselves into staying, because I want us to make sure when we leave, we're clear. Like, I've checked off these boxes, right? It's not confusion, but it's clarity. It's not a decision from pressure. I feel at peace. Again, it's not a decision. I feel bitter, but I feel whole. Like, I'm good. Like, I thought this out. I thought it through. I checked off all the boxes. I've wrestled with, what I thought I needed to wrestle with. And now it's time to move into number 4. The question is, are you staying out of fear or faith? And so that's ultimately an important question, because if we haven't wrestled through, have we explored the healthy options before walking away? If I didn't wrestle with that, I can speak for myself. Then I have to question, then why are you staying if maybe some things didn't align? Or why are you staying if God is speaking to you in this way? And so I have to stress this a lot. Like, it goes back to just being honest with ourselves. Is staying in this job, is staying in my role, is staying in this routine, is it me being faith led? Or am I clinging to it because I'm afraid of what life might look like if I let go of it? And that faith and that fear, it's tension, because fear is it's a part of our emotions, right? It's an emotion that we should all experience. We are wired to experience fear. But the problem is when we allow fear to speak louder than the faith, right? Faith makes room. Fear, it will allow us to cling tight to what's, again, comfortable. Faith says there's more ahead. Like, faith is the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things that are unseen. So as I'm walking in faith, there's something ahead of me. I don't know what the pathway looks like, but there's this inner knowing and belief and trust that if I continue to put one step ahead of the other, I'm going to walk into something that God has already prepared for me. But fear, on the other hand, says, what if this is the best I'll ever get? It's a limiting belief that squashes out the possibility and reality that there's something greater. Because fear dresses up, it comes up as logic, right? It shows up at, let me just get everything in order before I make this decision. It may come up as, I need more clarity. Let me circle back. Let me talk to this person. Let me talk to that person. Let me make sure I heard what I thought I heard. Fear comes up as, what if it's worse on the other side? Again, I'm catastrophizing. Like, I'm like setting myself up to not make a move, to not make an action when I'm resting and pausing in fear. And suddenly, like, if I would have stayed there and questioned, like, okay, well, what if? Well, yeah, what if? Like, there can be like three outcomes. What if it's bad? What if it's not good? But what if I just move, right? And I believe that when we honor like our faith, or when we honor, let me say this first, when we honor fear and we stay in a space that no longer feeds our soul, no longer feeds our spirit, or no longer honors God because of fear, this is what happens. The fear will convince us that comfort is safety, that staying is faithfulness. That's what the fear will convince us of. And so I'm reminded that, again, now I'll pick this back up. Faith doesn't always mean staying. Sometimes faith is found in the leaving. Sometimes faith will say, even if I don't have all the details, I trust the direction. So I was asked, again, it came out of nowhere when I had decided to quit my job, like, okay, what's next? I had a concept of and a plan. You know, I just don't make these decisions without a plan of what was next. I didn't have all the details, but I trusted the direction. I knew that in walking away and quitting, I knew that there's one thing for sure, two things are for certain. It's going to cause me to evolve into this version of Lindsay I haven't seen before. Like, I love this version that I'm evolving into, that I am. I also love, like, when I'm walking in faith, it means that fear is not going to hold me hostage anymore. And so that last question, it leads me to my final question that, and I've sat with many more, but I feel like these are the pressing ones that, not pressing, you know, there's no press here, but these are the soft ones. Let me reframe it. These are the soft ones that I believe can be helpful and beneficial to someone out there wrestling um and wanting to know, like, okay, how do I know like it's time to quit the job? And so this last one, I think it's mine when I think back at it now. Um it's one of my favorite questions. Not that I get giddy over it, but just because I think it was the easiest one after I worked through the tense questions to answer. Um I reflected on this a lot. What would I choose if fear wasn't leading the conversation? And so, again, I touched on it in the previous question, but Fear, it's going to have a microphone. Fear, it's going to be loud. Fear will be familiar. It's a part of us. And I know this in the work that I do. Fear doesn't always show up as panic or anxiety. It may have symptoms of it. It can manifest for sure, right? As it, but it can also mimic wisdom. It can borrow the voice of logic, and it can even sound responsible, but like, ooh, that's you, fear, sounding responsible. And yet it leaves no room for peace. And so, you know, living in that space of fear, no peace. There was a season where I had the decision, it was looming, but I just didn't have any peace because I was so afraid. Um, and also it doesn't leave space for God to, sometimes God has to talk audibly or however God talks to you loud and clear, but God also speaks in a gentle whisper. And so I felt God talking to me. He was speaking to me. I went on one of my trips last year, my Eat, Pray, Love trip, and you know, God was just speaking so clear, and I can't wait to roll out like some of the stuff that I was able to do on that trip. I had gone, for some time, and it allowed me to just take a break and just to really hear like what God was trying to tell me. And I'm learning this more and more as I embrace this soft mode, Lindsay. God's voice, it sounds like freedom. Like, there's no argument there. Like, he says it in his word, like, whom the Son sets free. This is Jesus speaking. They're free indeed, right? God's voice sounds like alignment, right? Not walking in my own path or walking in my own way, but really aligning with his voice and hearing it, right? If you hear my voice, harden not your heart. He says that, right? And so he wants us to be aligned with him, to be in step with him. But then also I'm learning that God's voice, it's assurance. Like, you understand like how much comfort I've had, like from the time and I'll talk about this in the next episode, like printed out my letter. Did I print out a letter? I don't know if I printed out a letter. Maybe I did. I can't remember. But I just had assurance, like God was with me. Like, I will never leave you nor forsake you. Like, those are the promises that I had read over my life and have read throughout my life. And they just started to ring louder and clearer. And I just felt comforted, and I just felt like a warm hug. Like, I felt a gentle squeeze, like from God, like, you got this. Like, I've equipped you. You've learned so many skills. You've gotten so much experience. You've endured so many like seasons. And so it was I made my exit stage left, knowing that like everything that had led up until that moment, it was God preparing me to take that next step. And so I know that even when the next step feels risky, because it is risky, we're living in a climate now, Matthew 24 is real. Like, it's so real. Like, who walks away when there's so much uncertainty in our world, right? It's so risky. Like, think about the inflation. Like, many people ask me, how are you going to get paid? Like, what are you going to do? Like, what is life going to look like beyond the pulpit? Like, so many different questions, right? And a lot of those questions, they project fear. Those are real questions, right? I welcome them, but that's fear that was trying to creep into me, right? And I had to block it with, like, God will supply. Like, God will take care of all of my needs. I was in there preaching at folk, but in the back of my mind, I had to like disconnect from like, those are great questions. I believe people were really curious and concerned, like, and I really appreciate the concern. I really do. I felt it in my heart. But I also recognize like God's peace is present. You know, like although faith may be risky, it's not the absence of discomfort, but it's the presence of God. Like, yeah, like simply put, right? And so when I feel the angst or when I feel the questions, when I feel the fear, I ask God, like, what are you trying to tell me? Right? When I hear the fear, what truth is fear trying to talk me out of? It's trying to talk me from my promise. It's trying to talk me out of my blessing. Um, but more importantly, what my obedience look like in this season, even if it feels uncertain. And that to me, it means more like I'm walking in alignment and obedience than giving way to fear. And so there you have it. Those are 5 questions that I had. Some of the questions that I had, those soft questions, as I navigated how to know it's time to quit your job. I want to end this segment off with a pivot prayer. And this is one of the prayers that I've written and prayed as I've gone through my journey. I'm still on my journey. And this is a pivot prayer for direction for anyone out there. And it goes like this. You can assume a prayer posture, if you will. Lord, I need wisdom. Show me where to go and what to do. I don't want to make decisions rooted in fear or ego. Let your peace be the compass that points me forward. Amen. So I want you to download my newest book, Pivot Prayers. I want you to check the description in the box so you can have these prayers as you're navigating your pivots. But most importantly, thank you so much for tuning in to another episode. As you know, this podcast is listener supported. And so I thank everyone that keeps me and keeps us on the air. Before you go, please make sure you like, share, comment, and subscribe to this channel to tap into so many ways to just pivot with purpose. Bye for now. Until next time, I'll see you soon.
Thanks for the pause, for riding this way.